So does the acute response in your study, or even in other studies, in terms of plasma hormones, does it have any meaning, physiological meaning at all?
So we looked at testosterone and cortisol, right? And from a testosterone level, we didn't see significant changes. What we actually saw were decreases across the board. And I think Dr. Willoughby can speak more to the receptor side of this. But our best inkling as to why we saw those decreases, even if they're not significant, we're looking at receptor uptake, right? So we looked at from basal to immediately post-exercise. On the cortisol side, we saw really no changes, but what that might be driven to is because a lot of the low group with the higher stress response, they all mainly most of them lifted in the morning, and cortisol peaks in the morning. So is it really going up, or is it already elevated to begin with? But no, I'm actually interested in Dr. Willoughby's take on this. I guess if we were to redo the study or look at it kind of going down the road, right, future directions, like looking at androgen receptor levels, as well as testosterone levels over not just an immediate post, but over a 24-hour curve, basically. I think that we would start to see differences in the curves between high versus a low load.
Yeah, I think the issue when you're talking about testosterone, particularly looking at stressors that will induce a testosterone response in regards to its relation to hypertrophy, these acute or these very short-lived increases in testosterone are really not going to have much impact on muscle hypertrophy at all. And so, thus insert the 6,400 pound elephant in the anabolic steroids. They do what they do because they increase testosterone levels, not acutely, but over the long haul. And so a person typically will remain super physiological for quite some time. And so that provides a recency effect to actually increase muscle protein synthesis, but keep it activated for a long period of time, weeks, for the hypertrophic response to actually occur. And so, we've seen, it goes back from, in Dr. Antonio and I know because he and I have talked about this more than once, and he knows where I'm going with this. When you talk about a lot of the work from, say, Dr. Kramer and some of the other ones back where they were seeing these increases in testosterone and growth hormone, during the workout that might stay elevated for about 30 minutes and then they were gone. And so, quite a bit to be said about that. And even cortisol, you'd see these increases in cortisol. That's just a normal response to the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the stress axis. That's what it does. It's responding to a stressor, a physical and or psychological stressor. In this case was resistance training. And so it increases, but that stress, it's more metabolically because it thinks that it's going to have to mobilize fuel substrate. But that response goes away as well. So all these responses, these short-lived endocrine responses really are meaningless in regards to hypertrophy. Hypercortisolemia is only going to cause muscle proteolytic activity and thus perhaps muscle atrophy if it's elevated for a relatively long period of time, not several hours, but we're talking about, for instance, days or a couple of weeks or so. In the case of like a clinical, like a cachexia type of scenario, where somebody is extremely hypocaloric, for instance. So, again, it's one of these things where even if we saw some increases in androgen receptor upregulation over the course of a few hours, again, that's going to be somewhat contingent upon perhaps what we see with the testosterone response. But when the testosterone response is attenuated, then so will be the androgen receptor response. So again, it has to do with how long can we elevate testosterone in regards to muscle hypertrophy. We want to elevate it. We want to keep it elevated for quite some time. So, yeah, anyway, so I didn't mean to ramble on about that, but that's actually a very good question. And there's been quite a bit done about that. And you still see that quite a bit. So.
No, I agree. And I think to your point, everyone thinks that testosterone is the end all be all for building muscle. And I think we've already kind of touched on, right, is there needs to be context with it. There's other factors with it that people kind of don't think about. And I think kind of you bring up the steroids is a great point, which is, you need to go super physiological to see that giant response in it.
Well, here's the other thing is that, and I talk about that when I teach in my endocrinology section in my classes, is that, we all have this constitutively regulated hormone level within our body of testosterone. So we have the normal range of testosterone, normal clinical range. And so if somebody has their normal range is 600, like say in a male versus somebody whose normal range is 450. Well, that may be their genomic set point, but it doesn't mean that the 600 person is going to be able to acquire more muscle than the 450 nanograms per deciliter person. That's their. But that being said, is that the normal clinical levels of testosterone are there for that individual. The only way testosterone is really going to come into play to really drive a major hypertrophic response is that if we can elevate that level fairly significant and keep it elevated. The only way we're going to be able to do that is exogenously with exogenous testosterone, because the body operates on such a close negative feedback system that it's not going to allow itself normally to elevate significantly and stay that way. And the only way we can do that is not only by increasing the total testosterone, but even more importantly, increasing the free level of testosterone, the bioavailable level of testosterone. And the only way to do that is through PEDs. So,
well, I got to ask this question then, and I know I've talked to Tony about this. There are a lot of social media posts about testosterone boosters, right? And as we all know, in order to get an anabolic effect from testosterone, it has to be chronically administered, and you have to have either super physiologic or pharmacologic levels for a while.
yes.
So when you get these little blips with these T boosters, whether it's Tongat Ali or fenugreek or whatever the other
Fidoja isn't a
shit
big
is.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to get an anabolic response from those T boosters? Marissa, Darren, Tony?
I'm gonna defer to Dr. Willoughby for this one.
No, and that's because, for instance, in some of the studies that are out there, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, that have shown some significant, or I should say, some improvement, even statistically significant, might show like a 20% increase in their total testosterone, or maybe even a more less subtle response in free testosterone. But nevertheless, a 20%, if somebody has a 20% increase, and that would be based on these boosters fairly appreciable, a 20% increase is still not going to push them outside of the boundary of their clinical normal range, and certainly not anywhere close to being super physiological. So no.
And even if they did, Dr. D, would probably be, again, that would be an acute probably elevation. It's not going to be chronic, which is you just alluded to, which is necessary to induce that hypertrophy.
Yeah, that's an outstanding point, because, you know, we're really going to get the more prolonged response with more fat soluble versions of exogenous preparation. You're not going to get these from these herbal preps, because that would be kind of like, you know, some type of a aqueous based preparation that's that does its thing and runs its course very, very quickly.
Well, aren't we all guilty? Maybe Marissa's not guilty, but aren't we all guilty? Do you remember when Smilax was huge back in the 80s, or I don't even know when? Do you remember Smilax, Marissa?
I don't.
Oh,
Yeah.
just to show what a bunch of knuckleheads the three of us were.
Yeah, remember
It was a droplet, sublingual droplet, and it was supposed to have this crazy anabolic response. And it was like, man, this
Think
shit's
about all that stuff, Smilax, ecdysterones,
Oh, it's crazy.
you know, insect, whatever. And, oh, hey,
Liquid, it was liquid
Joey,
adrenal
Joey.
glands. And
yes.
you guys are also going to remember way back when, particularly I know with Joey, because he and I are basically the same age. Remember the raw glandulars?
Oh, yes.
So you could take the raw orchic, which was basically just ground up bull testicle, and because the testicle makes testosterone, you're going to take that and just get jacked and stuff.
Absolutely.
You know, I was probably about 19 or 20, and it just kind of really getting into lifting heavy, and you know, oh yeah, I went and gave that a try. I mean, the tablets were like 3 inches long. I mean, just trying to swallow one was just like.
Oh, remember the liver tablets? They were the size of a flash drive.
Same thing.
Yeah. They were like swallowing flash drives.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, remember all that stuff, Joey. So
The good old days of taking shit that doesn't work.
yeah. Well, then you got, like, you know, even more fairly recently, the list goes on and on. Aspartic acid, and I mean, you know.
Oh yeah, that's right. Aspartic acid. Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
it's
crazy.
just. Yeah, it just.
I guess I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question. I'm not the host on this show.
Oh, you could ask.
So with the T boosters, what are your thoughts on like SARMs?
Oh, Darren's got lots of thoughts on SARMs.
We published that review article, and then
Mhm.
we did that case study. You know,
Because I remember talking with Tom and Stephen about this, and they basically were like, tell everyone not to do this.
yeah, well, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, anecdotally, you know, you'd see people that would be I mean, like when a month's time would be, you know, increasing lean mass like via ADEXA, pretty impressively, and then their body fat would be their fat mass would be going down as well. But once we started doing some stuff and looking at some biochemical data, what we were beginning to see is it was literally tanking endogenous testosterone levels, and also driving LDL and suppressing HDL levels quite dramatically as well. So the biochemical impact relative to the so-called anabolic impact, you know, I'm not sure that would be worth it. So you know, it's, again, you're talking about something that it's hard to know exactly, because it's not FDA cleared. So, you know, having any clinical trials, we don't have the data to that. But I mean, you know, there's a little bit of data that from some experimental studies in older men that kind of we used as a template. But yeah, you know, from what we ended up seeing initially from some of the biochemical data, it scares me.
Yeah,
I mean, what we were seeing it do, it was suppressing the testosterone axis, the hypothalamo-gonadal axis. It was suppressing the axis across the board. So yeah, and also causing dyslipidemia as well. So not a good combination.
Okay. Good
Yeah,
to know. I
I
wasn't aware of that, actually, how negative those effects could be.
Yeah.
I teach a sports nutrition class, and like we have an entire lecture just on like steroids, pharmacological ergogenic aids, all that stuff. And the first question I always get from students is, do you know anything about SARMs? And I literally send them your guys' papers. I'm like, you read and you determine whether or not you want to take this. I am not telling you to take anything.
Yeah.
The best PEDs by far are still androgens and EPO. Nothing comes close to those two.
Mhm. Yeah.
SARMs, I would probably stay away from the SARMs.
I tell my students, I'm like, if you do something, I don't want to know about it. Don't say, Dr. Bello told me to take SARMs. I'm like, no.